So, John Tavares, do you like the chances at all? Is it a possibility, or are we just blue skying it here?
Well, I mean, I'm sure the Leafs are going to do a presentation and try to entice him to come home, if you will. Now, they attempted to do the same thing with Steven Stamkos a couple of years ago, and Steven elected to stay with a team that he thought was closer to getting to the Stanley Cup final, and his decision was probably correct because at that point, certainly Tampa Bay was. It will be very interesting to see how the Islanders approach this because obviously I think Tavares is frustrated with having to live on Long Island, practice there, come into the city through the traffic and everything to get to Barclays Center. They're not going to rectify that with a new arena out at Belmont Park probably for at least 3 years. And next year they're going to play some games at the old Coliseum in Nassau and the remainder in Brooklyn. So it will be interesting to see how, if in fact frustrated he is with that and with the fact the Islanders have really gone nowhere and seem to be going in reverse. But the other aspect is that they have, signed with Lou Lamoriello, and Lou's a sweet talker. We all know that. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that dynamic plays out. But I think that certainly John Tavares would be remiss if he didn't at least entertain offers and see exactly where and how much people are interested in his services for next year.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Joe. A free agent like this doesn't come around too often. It's a generational type player. We're looking at a top 5 player in the world. What would be the casualties, though, based on what the Maple Leafs have on this roster? Because if Austin Matthews is getting paid what Austin Matthews is deserved, we have William Nylander who's up for a contract in a couple of years. We're gonna be looking at more and more players. And Tavares is going to come in that, that top 5, top 10 figure. Surely there might be some casualties that, maybe a Nylander has to go. Maybe somebody else has to go. Do you anticipate that sort of thing happening as the domino effect happens with the Maple Leafs if this were to happen?
Well, if it does, obviously you're putting a key component of your core is going to be John Tavares.
Yes.
Then, of course, you have to identify who are the 4 or 5 other players that are going to be your core that you're going to have to get into the salary cap. And then you augment that with young players who aren't as expensive. And the one thing that the Maple Leafs have an abundance of right now, certainly with the Calder Cup champion Toronto Marlies team, is a lot of young players who are not going to be overly expensive for the next couple of years until at such time that they may have to be sold off the way the Chicago Blackhawks did with a lot of their players after they won Stanley Cups. So, it's sort of the damned if you do and damned if you don't. If they're gonna sign John Tavares, then they're certainly not going to re-sign James Van Riemsdyk and Tyler Bozak, if in fact that is a situation that they're thinking of anyway. But having said that, John Tavares is a pretty good piece to be a part of your core player, and you can only imagine what the Leafs are like down the middle if you had Matthews, him, Kadri, and whoever plays on the 4th line. That's a pretty strong unit.
We're in conversation with Joe Bowen here on rawmike.com from the DKI studios in downtown Toronto. You mentioned that Calder Cup win. That was really something. I think it's also a reflection, Joe, of just how sort of solid and the depth that we're starting to see with this organization that, and as you know, we've both been around a long time. We've both seen, the best and the worst of this particular team. But in this sort of particular model right now, I think that is you've got now pieces of some assets to deal should you want to do something, because you now have that depth of organization, which again is also a little bit of a mirror image of what they wanted to see, just like Detroit was at one point. They're certainly not now, but they were at one point, and it kind of has this very similar feeling to me.
Well, absolutely. And over the years, Michael, and watching other organizations, and I'll use the Montreal Canadiens as a perfect example back in the 70s and the 80s. And when I was in Nova Scotia and in the early 1980s, their whole axiom was you had to earn the jersey. You came out of junior hockey, and no matter what kind of a player you were, or high scoring or whatever, you're going to play in the American Hockey League. You're going to learn to play as a professional. You're going to learn to live on your own. You're going to learn to how to prepare yourself, both mentally, physically, and eating-wise and everything else. And you're going to earn the jersey. And then when you are overdone, then you might get an opportunity to play with the big club. But you're not going to be rushed and pushed. And that, I think, is an axiom that Brendan Shanahan has implemented into this organization, and it's a good one. And certainly the proof is in the pudding. They've got an abundance of good young players coming out of the Marlies situation this year who are going to be knocking on the door, pushing for jobs. And that's giving them the depth that they can trade somebody. They can, for the lack of a better thing, William Nylander, there's a nice tradable situation. Is he good enough to bring a top-flight defenseman back in return? Who knows? But they have somebody like Andreas Johnsson who is knocking at the door that's going to be every bit as good to push William Nylander as well. So the whole idea of having that push from beneath is a very important part of any successful organization. And if you have a piece that you can trade and you have a piece that can fit right in there where that last piece went, then it's going to be a very big part of this organization going forward. And they've done that. They've done a nice job. They've augmented the Marlies with some veteran guys who are, being paid well enough down there, but they're also buying into the program to teach these guys how to be professionals, teach these guys how to win.
Joe, that's exactly the next question I was going to follow up on. We know some of those Marlies will be graduating to the next level. One in particular, and I'm kind of curious, and I know it's totally Maple Leaf Reporter-like of me to say it, but I'm kind of curious about the backup goaltending situation because Gareth Sparks was the best goaltender outside of the NHL. And now he's going to be pushing for an opportunity to back up Freddie Anderson. Now, and I'm not trying to sit there and say Curtis McElhinney didn't do a good job because he did an awesome job last year. And for that competition, that's one I'm starring when it comes to September 1st and everybody comes to camp. I don't know about you, but that's something that I'm kind of intrigued on. Where are they going to go in which direction? Because Sparks has earned the right to at least challenge, if not take that position when everything's said and done in the fall.
Absolutely, and his record speaks for itself. I think one of the biggest things was Game 6. He didn't play very well. Boy, Game 7 he played terrific.
Yeah.
He's had a wonderful season. He has been the best goaltender in the American Hockey League, and you at some point in time have to reward these people for that. I agree. Curtis McElhinney did a wonderful job. I think that if Garrett Sparks supplanted him as the backup goaltender, I think you're looking at Sparks playing a lot more than what McElhinney did in the previous couple of years as the back-to-back guy and that sort of thing going forward. So I think he would be in a position that he would be trying to push Frederik Andersen, and that's not a bad thing either. And, if he's going to play a little bit more for Andersen, then Anderson's going to be that much fresher when the playoffs arrive. So I think that that's a situation that really has to happen, to be honest with you. I think, David, you don't do this over the course of a whole year, and goaltenders take longer, as we all know. But Garrett Sparks has certainly paid his dues, and I think that he has to sit back after sipping out of that Calder Cup and saying, you know what, they owe me a good shot at this job next year. And I think that that's something that will be within the organization going forward next season and next training camp.
Yeah, and I think great to see. The kid's got a fabulous attitude, too. I mean, he's just, to me, he's a winner all around. Now, Joe, if we're looking at the back end with the Blue Liners, what do you think in terms of what they would like to see and who stays and who goes? What does the back end look like for the Leafs in the offseason?
Well, every team is looking for that elusive number one guy. I don't know, even if you look at the Marlies and youngsters like Liljegren that they brought on and played very well this season and played a lot at the American Hockey League level, I'm not sure if he's the quasi-essential number one guy. But having said that, you take a look at some of the teams that got well into the Stanley Cup playoffs, and I guess the most important one was the Vegas Golden Knights. And the last time I checked, no one gave up a number one defenseman in the draft for those guys. They had a whole bunch of number 3s, 4s, and maybe a 2 that augmented their staff. So I personally, and this is only my own reflection on it, I would like to see our defense be a lot more physical, or at least have that aspect to it. And I'm not sure that they have anybody in the organization that's going to do that. Borgman is a bit of an aggressive guy, but I don't think that he's certainly going to be like a number 1 or number 2 guy that can play physical. Roman Polak tried to fill that role, but it's not likely he'll be back. So if there's going to be a situation with that defense that is augmented with it, they're going to get pushed with some of those kids coming up from the Marlies. But I think we're going to see some sort of a deal with one of the young forwards, especially if Tavares ended up coming here, to look for a defenseman with some size and some obviously skill, but also maybe a little bit of a mean streak attached to him. And when you took a look at the final between those two teams, there was a lot of physical play. And I'm not sure even up front the Maple Leafs have that. So I know Mike Babcock wants to play the fast game and puck possession and everything else. But every once in a while, you got to have some physicality, I believe. And I think that's one of the aspects of this hockey club that they're going to have to look at in the offseason.
Yeah, it's definitely part of that shopping list, which we definitely look forward to. Final question from me, Joe, and I know this is already a couple weeks old news, but it's still something that we're proud of. I'm sure you're very proud of as well. Receiving the Foster Hewitt Memorial Award for outstanding contributions to hockey. You got the call from the Hall. Could you take us into how you got the call, or where were you? I know when we talk to other Hall of Famers, they always have certain memories of, I was here, or I shared it with this person. First off, congratulations. It's awesome news. I know it's a couple weeks old, but we're talking to you for the first time. And what actually happened on the day of the call?
Well, it's kind of strange. I mean, obviously, I guess the bottom of the barrel has been reached.
Oh, so please, come on.
I think my name was stuck on the bottom there or whatever. But Chuck Caton is the president of the Broadcasters Association, and Mike Emmerich and a couple of others are involved in the selection process. And Chuck, it was funny because we had been texting one another back and forth. I'd heard that Chuck was in some contract issues with the new ownership in Carolina, and I was kind of sending him a little note to kind of add my support to him and whatever we could do and help and whatnot. And after a couple of days of that, and about a week later, he phoned me and just said, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "Not yet." And so when I did, he said, "Well, this has nothing to do with our issue down here in Carolina. I just wanted to tell you that you are the Foster Hewitt Award winner for 2018. And it means a great deal, obviously. And I've used this analogy. I've watched the Green Bay Packers winning the Super Bowl with Mike Holmgren and Brett Favre, and they're in the dressing room, and Holmgren has the Vince Lombardi trophy, and his comments to the team were, every football player really wants to win this, but we're from Green Bay. We know who this trophy is named after. We live in the shadow of Vince Lombardi's statue outside of Lambeau Field, and so it means more to us bringing this trophy back to Green Bay because of what it's named after. Well, I grew up listening and idolizing Foster Hewitt and Bill Hewitt and Danny Gallivan and people like that, and to be the voice of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and really there's been only four as far as the radio is concerned, I guess. Foster, along with Ron Hewitt, who is no relation to Foster, Peter Marr for a couple of years, and then for the last 36 years, it's been me sitting in that chair. And so this award will mean a great deal to me because it is named after a former wonderful broadcaster of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I'm sitting in his chair, so it means a great deal.
Well, we're happy for you. And also, I should also give you a congratulations, because I thought as this conversation started with the Foster Hewitt Award, how is Joe going to somehow work the Green Bay Packers or into this conversation? And you did it. And you found a way.
I did it. Well, but I know there was a bet on. I would have phoned David earlier, and we could have really got this in early. But,
well, it's a tremendous accomplishment,
awesome.
and again, I know where your heart is, and sometimes people are called lifers, but that's what you are. You've grown up in the rinks, you've called in all the rinks, and now your son up in Sudbury. I mean, that to me is also a wonderful story because it's such a reflection of the importance of not only just the game, Joe, in your family and what it's meant to your family, but it's the culture of hockey. It's the thing that binds us all together. It's the reason why when the disaster and the devastation of Humboldt occurred, you're a part of that circle that understands and reaches out because it touches all of us. It touched all of Canada, and that's to me, Joe, what the culture of hockey is, and it's how it's embraced in different families. And your family is a great example of that.
well, I thank you for that, Mike, and you're right. For the length and breadth of this nation and the hockey community is a fairly small one. I mean, in retrospect, but very tight. And the Humboldt thing was obviously something that everyone rallied to, and not only in Canada. This was I had a young man who was involved in trying to get hockey going in Ireland. Wanted to know what he could do. Could they send something? And that was, I mean, that speaks volumes because if you have spent any time at all in this game and gone at any level, you've spent time on a bus. You've spent time away from home. You've spent time being billeted by families. You've dreamt of being a broadcaster, and we lost one of those in that tragedy. So all of this, the dreams and aspirations of all of these kids were there, and it touched home. Whether you still have those aspirations, or whether those aspirations you've been told, no, you're not good enough, but you still love the game and you love the sport, and you're certainly very much attuned to what went on with that. And it was a tragedy, but from it all, I think a tremendous amount of outpouring and good has come from it, as only it could in a hockey community.
Well said, and thanks so much, Joe, for joining us here on the show today.
Yeah, it's great talking to you guys. I haven't. This is the first time. I hope it's not the last.
Well, no, and we're also broadcasting from a bar, so don't tell Jim Ralph, because I really don't feel like having those issues.
No. We're liable to be down there fairly early. Well, the World Cup must really help you guys out because they're opening the bars early, aren't they?
I don't know about this one. This is an interesting location. Where this is somehow I think it's illegal. I don't know what goes on in this place, but I don't know if I think it's above board. Hey, and Ireland's not in it, so I'm not as excited as
that's right. So who cares?
Yeah,
exactly.
that's right. Head back to the golf course and have another beer. Hey, hopefully I'll see you this summer too, Joey. Always awesome having you on the show.
Thanks so much, Joe.
Yeah, thanks for doing this, Joe.
Good talking to you guys. Take care.
That is the legendary Joe Bowen.